Another example of that, which I've quoted here again, which I want to bring up because it puts these things in perspective. Sometimes one could think that's a carte blanche for just breaking all your precepts, for carrying ladies if you're a monk, or for doing these other things in ordinary circumstances. I'm talking about exceptional circumstances here, when, like as a monk, I'm allowed to carry a beautiful lady, or where as a doctor it seems appropriate to perform an abortion. This other case concerns the Buddhist precept of lying. And it changed my opinion of lying once when a disciple from here, he was an Englishman who just happened to be in the Royal Navy, but he retired to Perth. He had a heart attack many years ago. He's a very devoted Buddhist, one of the earliest members of our Buddhist society. After his heart attack, they managed to get him to Royal Perth in time to save his life, but he was on the edge, his arteries were clogged, and so he was put on the emergency list for a bypass operation, which was the usual procedure in those days before stents and balloons and stuff. So he was in one of the wards in Royal Perth Hospital, a ward with 3 other men, waiting for his time to have the bypass, but also waiting until his condition was strong enough to take that operation, because he just had a heart attack. So he was waiting for that many days, and I used to go and visit him. And you know what it's like being in a ward with other men or other women. You're there all day, 24 hours, and you must get to speak to these people, and you get friends with them. When I was in hospital once in Rockingham, just for 6 or 7 days, again in a ward with 3 other people, you really got friendly with these people, but unfortunately when you're friendly with these people you have some very stupid conversations. Because I remember a conversation we had in this ward, and we got round to the worst possible medical procedure. Many of these people have been in hospital before, and some said it was one of these injections you have to find out how your kidneys are going, because they put a huge amount of radioactive material in your veins. Another one said, that's nothing, the barium milks, it tastes awful, that's the worst. And I remember someone said, no, I've had all of those, the very, very worst is the barium enema, they said. And that's when one of the men in the corner went white. He said, I'm going to have that this afternoon. Stupid thing we do. But this was a ward in which everyone was having the same thing, bypass. And the fellow in the next bed was there first before this Buddhist guy. He had his bypass one afternoon. And it was that evening when his wife called me at the monastery in Serpentine. And she was very, very agitated. And the reason she called me, she said she'd just been to see her husband at the hospital. And the husband had asked how Jack was, the fellow who just had the bypass. And she said, he had a wonderful, successful operation, that he's now in the ICU recovering. When the truth of the matter is, she told me that Jack died. The operation wasn't successful. And she said that she'd lied to her husband. She said that was the first time in 30 years she told an untruth deliberately to her husband. She thought that if she had told the truth, the man in the next bed, who her husband befriended, who had the same operation her husband was going to face in 1 or 2 days' time, if she'd have told the truth that that guy had died, she thought her husband might have worried so much, would have been in so much fear, that that would lower his chances of surviving the operation. As it was, her husband came that close to dying. His operation was successful, but it was touch and go for many, many hours. He pulled through. So when she told me that she'd lied to her husband by telling her husband that the fellow hadn't died when he had, out of concern for her husband's safety, I told her in that situation, probably your lie was justified. Perhaps it was coming from wise compassion and concern. Maybe if you'd have told the truth, your husband may not have survived.